I will be presiding, and I'll introduce my counselors, Counselor Duff, and I welcome all of you. And first of all, I ask if you'll all put away cell phones in respect to this nominee, and that means councils also. And I'm going to ask you all if who want to speak, who thinks they want to speak, would you stand up and we'll swear you in? And the nominee too. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. So I welcome you today, special day, and I'm going to read the letter that we received from the governor. Dear councilors, I am pleased to nominate Robert Earl Toone Jr. to the position of Associate Justice of the Appeals Court. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I am enclosing the nominees for your convenience, Laura T. Haley, and also the Honorable, and it's for the Honorable Mary Thomas Sullivan that you're, okay. So, having said that, I would like to start with your witnesses. And so, I want to introduce Councilor Iannella, Councilor Kennedy, and Councilor Ferrara.
Good afternoon. Afternoon.
And so your first witness is Charlotte Burrows, and Chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Welcome. You can sit down.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity to address you today. It is a distinct honor and privilege to be able to testify in support of this nomination of Robert E. Toone to serve as Associate Justice of the Appeals Court of Massachusetts. I'm here today in my personal capacity as someone who wants to share a perspective of knowing Mr. Toone for over 2 decades as both a friend and a colleague. He has both intellectual brilliance and common sense, and the breadth and depth of his experience in both civil and criminal law would be a tremendous asset to the people of Massachusetts. Most importantly, he has a deep sense of integrity that would make him especially well-suited to the role of judge. I worked closely with Mr. Toone from 2003 to 2005, when he served on the Judiciary Committee staff of Senator Edward M. Kennedy. During that time, he distinguished himself as the senator's lead staffer on a wide variety of tremendously important and high-profile matters that came before the court. It included criminal justice, sentencing, drug treatment, issues that were quite prevalent at the time regarding same-sex marriage, hate crimes, employment protections for LGBTQI+ persons, juvenile justice, and executive branch and judicial nominations. Although the Kennedy office was part of the minority in the Senate at the time, he had a number of successes. From passage of the 2003 Prison Rape Elimination Act to increasing federal resources for drug treatment for indigent defense and laying the groundwork for passage of critical federal hate crimes legislation. His effectiveness on Capitol Hill was due not only to his impressive intelligence and work ethic, but also to his ability to see sides of a legal problem that may not have been his own perspective initially, and to think quickly and distill those issues that were most essential to reaching a solution. I have rarely worked with anyone who could as clearly see the broad context of complicated legal issues while also understanding the factual details, why they mattered, which ones mattered, and how that would impact people in the real world. Most attorneys tend to be either detail-oriented or big picture. Mr. Toone is both, and his ability to think logically and methodologically about important and complex matters, while also bringing empathy to his analysis, is why he's a particularly inspired choice for this nomination. Finally, if selected to serve as a judge, I have absolute confidence that Mr. Toone would treat each individual who appeared before him with the utmost respect. Although a fierce advocate for social justice and the rights of the most vulnerable, he was also always unfailingly respectful as a colleague and an honest broker with staff on both sides of the aisle. That's an increasingly rare thing on Capitol Hill, I can say as someone who's lived now for 2 decades in DC. And his background representing Indigenous defendants and interacting with members of the public from all walks of life has given him the ability to truly listen to people whose experiences and perspectives may differ from his own. As a result, he has a deep understanding and commitment to the importance of equal justice under law. As someone who has spent my entire career in public service, I can say without hesitation that Mr. Toone's career is in the final tradition of serving the public and fighting for equal justice. So with that, I thank you, and I would be quite pleased to hear any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce councils who joined us. Sarah and Paul to Paula. We can have everybody. Okay, thank you. And before I ask the council if they have any questions of you, I'd like to introduce Justice Green. Thank you for coming. And you'll notice he's sitting in the governor's chair.
Something to do after 7.
Councilors have any questions? Yeah.
Not really a question so much as just, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's amazing you come out from, I assume, DC to support Mr. Toone's candidacy, his nomination, and I just very much appreciate hearing that perspective of the work that he did. We talked about it at length, but to hear it from your perspective just adds additional flavor and nuance to that work. And so I just wanted to thank you so much for coming and sharing all that with us.
Thank you.
So any other councils have any questions? No. Well, we thank you very much. Your testimony is valuable. Our next witness is Jesse Boudou. How did I do?
Got it just right, Council. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Governor's Council. My name is Jesse Boudou, and I am Deputy Chief Legal Counsel to Page Scott Reed in the Governor's Legal Office. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to step outside of my usual role around here to tell you a bit about the nominee, Robin Toone, who is someone I have known for a long time as a colleague, a mentor, and a friend. It is really my privilege to speak on Robin's behalf today. For 7 years, I worked alongside Robin in the Government Bureau at the Attorney General's office, which Robin has led since 2015. I was an Assistant Attorney General in and eventually the Managing Attorney of the Bureau's Trial Division, and Robin was the person who hired me into that role. I remember on the day that Robin interviewed me in his office, he showed me a big stack of case law that was on his desk and told me with some excitement about what he was working on that day, which was a brief to defend the state law that sets a charter school cap. And I asked Robin how he possibly had time to both run the Government Bureau and work on cases of his own. And I remember what he told me. He told me that even in his role, what he still loved to do best every day was solving hard problems, diving into case law and writing briefs. And if that sounded like the right thing to me, then I was in the right place. And he also told me that, like him, if I joined him, I would never have to wear a suit unless I went to court. And so between all of that, I was sold. To my good fortune, I was able to work with Robin nearly every day at the Attorney General's office. We worked on our own cases together. We were responsible together for editing, approving, and reviewing well over 100 SJC and appeals court briefs written by others. Our work ran the gamut from contract cases to tort cases to Article 48 ballot initiatives to challenges to pandemic era policies. We spent late nights batting ideas around. We helped prepare each other for oral arguments. we worked together to train countless new attorneys to make their first oral argument or to write their first appellate brief. And from all of that time I spent shoulder to shoulder with Robin, I want to tell you this without reservation. Robin is a kind and humble colleague. He is a versatile, intellectual powerhouse of a lawyer who brings not only 30 years of experience across civil and criminal law, but also an open mind to every case that he works on. He is a talented legal writer who writes clearly, thoughtfully, and in a way that both lawyers and non-lawyers can understand. And he is a person whose talents and training would have allowed him to choose any career path, but who chose a career of public service, of commitment to making the law more fair and our state a better place. I can honestly say that I am a better attorney for having had the good fortune to learn from Robin. When it comes to Robin's commitment to justice, I want to give you one example that really stands out to me from my time working together. From Robin's role leading the government bureau, he worked on some of the most high-profile state court cases of the past decade. But even being in that position, it is important to know this. Never once did Robin treat any one case on his desk as being less important or less worthy of his time than any other. Robin's clear and consistent expectation for both himself and his staff was that an appeal brought by, say, a self-represented inmate would be treated with the same level of attention, thoughtfulness, and care as any counseled case. If a self-represented plaintiff had a good point to make, but just hadn't gotten it down on paper clearly, Robin required that we, as the defense lawyers, give voice to the strongest version of what we knew that plaintiff was trying to say before turning to our own arguments, so that we could be sure that both that plaintiff's position and our own would be fully considered by the court. That basic commitment to fairness and respect for all litigants speaks to Robin's long history of representing the underserved, his commitment to a justice system that works for all, and his respect for the judicial process. And it also speaks to the same sense of even-handed justice that I know Robin would bring to the appeals court if confirmed. I also know that Robin, if confirmed, will bring the same level of generosity of spirit and support for colleagues that he has long shown to me. Despite overseeing a caseload of over 2,000 open cases in the Government Bureau, Robin still always had time to support me and my career and the careers of so many other young attorneys that he hired into the office. If I ever asked Robin to help me with a big case, he would be there without fail, having read most of the cases and ready to ask smart questions. If I asked Robin to listen to me practice an argument, he would be there. He would be generous with his time. He would tell me I did a great job if I needed a boost, and if I needed help, he would tell me with kindness and patience what needed fixing. For a big moment, Robin would drive across the state to be there in person with me in court to show his support. Call me afterwards to say I did awesome. Sometimes I was pretty sure that I had not done so awesome. And lastly, at times, even in my career, when my family and not my job needed to come first, including a nearly 5-month period when my son was in the hospital, Robin personally worked to give me flexibility that I needed to keep my career on track. And even more important, was there visiting me at my home, showing me friendship when that is what I needed the most. So to Robin, I owe a debt of gratitude for teaching me to be a better lawyer and a better manager of other lawyers. And I know that if confirmed, Robin will bring that same spirit of supportive collegiality to the appeals court. In doing so, he will contribute not only to his own opinions, but to the work of the court as a whole. I enthusiastically support Robin's nominations. I am happy to answer any questions.
Your testimony is very hacked-on. Thank you. Any questions from the councils? No,
Thank you.
very much.
Oh, wait, I have one question. How's the boss doing?
Best boss I've ever had.
And next witness is Sherry Costa. Welcome.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, members of the council, for giving me this opportunity to speak in support of the nomination of Robin Toone for Appeals Court Justice. My name is Sherry Costa, and I am the Managing Administrative Assistant for the Government Bureau. I have known Robin since he joined the Attorney General's office in 2015 as the Government Bureau Chief. I am not a lawyer, so I will not speak to his knowledge of the law, but I can speak to what kind of person Robin is to work with. As the Administrative Assistant for the Government Bureau, I am a non-legal manager for the Bureau, which consists of 4 divisions and 3 units, and coordinating the managing of the support staff and non-legal aspects of the day-to-day running of the Bureau. During this time, I have only heard positive statements from staff in the Bureau about their interactions with Robin. Robin is very easy to work with and is very self-sufficient and computer literate. He is he is very organized, and I don't remember ever having a last-minute rush with Robin. Whenever there was a court deadline, Robin always had his project completed in plenty of time for final production, and often has done almost all of the final production work himself. He gets along with everybody, whether it is a paralegal, lawyer, and is very respectful, funny, and humble. While he takes the work of the office very seriously, he does not take himself very seriously. Even though he is a bureau chief, he has graciously offered me his office when I am working in office, and he is working remote. This is a great deal for me. I get the big corner office without any of the responsibilities of the person who has to occupy it. He is always willing to speak about our cases and explain what is happening in a way that is understandable to non-lawyers. He is very aware that we are public servants and our responsibility to serve. Robin is very concerned about the welfare of the people on his staff. At the beginning of COVID, Robin worked to ensure that staff had the technology the Bureau needed to make sure the work of the office continued during this unprecedented crisis. In 2020, when COVID was something new, unknown, and very scary, Robin was very concerned that Bureau staff be able to work remote and remain safe at home as much as possible. The work of the Bureau continued on, never slowing down. In fact, work actually increased due to the challenges to all the various COVID executive orders, in addition to the usual course of business, which never seemed to slow down even during COVID. And Robin was very concerned about staff equity, making sure that all staff, not just the support staff, shared in the responsibilities of making sure the Bureau continued to function during the first months of remote work. One big concern during that time was making sure all the incoming mail was scanned and distributed to staff, rather than having just the paralegals be the only staff required to come into the office. Robin encouraged that all Bureau staff, division chiefs, AAGs, and non-legal staff had assigned slots for scanning the mail. No one was exempt. While the work we do is important, the people who work with him are equally as important. Recently, I have been dealing with health issues for both of my elderly parents. Robin has been very supportive and kind in giving me the flexibility to do what I need to do to be able to take care of them, and offering to help in any way that he can. Knowing that I have Robin's understanding and support is a huge relief during this stressful time, considering that I have been out of the office almost as much as I've been in. Recently, I brought my nieces to the office to show them where I work and introduce them to coworkers. We stopped by Robin's office, and I thought it was going to be a quick hello, and we'd be on our way. Although Robin is always very busy, he took time out of his day to have them come in his office, sit down, and ask them questions about why they were here, what's going on in school, and was genuinely interested in what they had to say. His connection to people is very important. Even though busy with management responsibilities, Robin will volunteer to handle difficult, complex cases and share in the burden when the divisions are exceptionally busy.
And just because joins a litigation team, he does not automatically assume the lead chair position and will take assignments from the team leader, just like all the others. He even volunteers to participate in the annual Article 48 initiative petition process by reviewing proposed ballot questions. I have seen that Robin's door is always open to anyone, no matter what his own work pressures and deadlines are. He will take the time to offer his guidance or advice to all, whether it is a brand new AAG, only a few weeks on the job, or any other member of the staff, senior management in the AG office, or others throughout government and legislative offices. At first, I was thrilled that Robin was nominated, and then I became sad when I realized this meant that Robin and I would no longer be working together. As a citizen of the Commonwealth, I am so happy that Robin has been nominated, as he is everything I would want in an appeals court justice. Having worked with Robin for many years, I know that he is smart, hardworking, dedicated, humble, and an all-around good person deserving of this honor. I am so thankful that I've had this opportunity to support his nomination, and to you, the members of the council, for listening to me today. Thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. Any questions? No questions. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. So that completes our list of witnesses. And so now I will ask you to make a presentation, tell us who you are and why you're here.
Chair Devaney, members of the Governor's Council, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and for taking the time to meet and talk with me in advance of this hearing. I appreciate the critical constitutional role that you serve as a check and balance on the judicial selection process. And I'm honored and humbled by the confidence that Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll have shown in me in nominating me to be an Associate Justice of the Appeals Court. I'd like to thank Valerie McCarthy for her work in keeping this process running smoothly. Thank you also to Charlotte Burrows, Jesse Boudou, and Sherry Costa for your testimony. I'm honored that each of you was willing to speak on my behalf today. Finally, I'd like to thank Chief Justice Green and Justice Shin for being here today, and the members of the Judicial Nominating Commission and the Joint Bar Committee for their service in reviewing judicial applications like mine. I'm so pleased to share this day with the 5 people at the center of my life. My parents, Bob and Donnie Toone, drove up from Southwest Virginia with their 2 dogs to attend today's hearing. They met in the 1960s as college students at Rice University in Houston. They raised my sister and me in Unionville, Pennsylvania, a small town an hour west of Philadelphia. My dad worked as an information technology consultant. My mom worked as a realtor. They gave me the values that have shaped my life, including hard work, humor, humility, and concern for those less fortunate than us. They have steadfastly supported me throughout my career, but I know they've been proudest of the jobs where I earned the least and tried to do the most good for others. I met my wife, Hayden Huskamp, on a blind date when I was working for Senator Kennedy in DC. Within a year, we were married and looking for an apartment to rent in Massachusetts. Hayden grew up in Kentucky, but ended up as a professor of health policy at Harvard Medical School, where she studies mental health and substance use disorder policy and end-of-life care. She is an absolutely wonderful partner, mother, daughter-in-law, and I'm grateful for every moment I get to share on this earth with her. Our lives have been made so much richer by our 2 daughters, Mariah and Finley. Finley is a junior at Newton North High School. She's skipping a few classes to be here today. Mariah graduated from North last June, and now she's living and working in Portland, Maine. Our 2 girls are intelligent, funny, kind, and courageous, and Hayden and I are immensely proud of them in every respect. When my career in the law comes to an end, I hope I will be able to tell my daughters that I used the considerable advantages and privileges in my life to try to make our world a better place. I decided to go to law school after reading Gideon's Trumpet, The Wonderful History of Gideon versus Wainwright by the late Anthony Lewis. I was so inspired by the Supreme Court's holding that under the Constitution, the government must provide poor defendants with the service of a trained professional to represent them in opposing charges brought by the government. What a commitment to fairness and equal justice in our legal system. It didn't take me long once I graduated from law school to realize how far reality can stray from our ideals. As a young attorney, I visited countless people, mostly men and women of color, in prisons and jails throughout Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. Some conditions of confinement they experienced are too horrible to describe here, and many were deprived of desperately needed medical and mental health care. But no matter what county jail I visited, I usually got the same questions. Do you know what's happening with my criminal case? I've been in jail for months, but no one will tell me. Do you know who my lawyer is? My colleagues and I began to sit in on the proceedings in the local courts, and what we saw often challenged our faith in the legal system. In one courtroom in South Georgia, defendants were mass processed with little concern for their basic rights. As they walked in the door, a bailiff would hand them a form titled Waiver of Rights for Plea. Called before the judge, they were immediately asked for a plea. If they entered pleas of guilty, they were told that they had just waived the right to counsel. If they pleaded not guilty, no mention of the right was made. Thousands of men and women were sentenced to years in prison as a result of this process. We filed suit in federal court against the judge, the prosecutor, and the county commissioners. The federal judge, the Honorable Deputy Lewis Sands, ultimately entered an order requiring the state court to provide the right to counsel as required by the Constitution. This was the first of many criminal justice reform lawsuits brought by my office, the Southern Center for Human Rights. Throughout my legal career, the gap between our ideals and the messiness of our reality has been a focus for me. Some of my most rewarding experiences have involved the defense of well-established principles like judicial independence, judicial discretion in sentencing, and the prohibition against torture and the inhumane treatment of detainees. More recently, I have defended state laws that protect workers, consumers, and investors, the authority of the governor to take emergency measures in response to the pandemic, and the right of the people to place important policy measures on the ballot. Other work of mine has involved principles not yet fully realized through the country, such as the right to be treated equally regardless of one's sexual orientation or gender identity, or the right of prisoners to be protected from violence. If I have any insight from my 28 years of legal practice, it's that our institutions are only as strong as the people who work in them. There's no guarantee that the principles we hold dear today, including due process, judicial independence, and equal justice, will forever continue. Rather, each new generation must rededicate itself to those principles to ensure that we truly live under a rule of law that benefits everyone. If this council sees fit to give its consent to my nomination to the appeals court, I will do my very best to adhere to those principles. I'm hopeful that the varied experiences I've had as a lawyer and the many meaningful relationships I've developed along the way will give me a perspective that will benefit my service as a justice. I will also, if confirmed, do what I can to continue the appeals court's well-deserved reputation for fairness, collegiality, and respectful treatment of parties and counsel. For most parties, the appeals court is the last stop in the judicial process, and it's critical that their circumstances and arguments be fully and fairly considered. I hope and I believe that I'll be up to this challenge. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Councilor Ainello. Do you have?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. We have a nice conversation on the telephone. Quite an impressive educational background, work history, and I think you're going to be great. It's good to see you folks here. Your daughters. It's an important day. I'm glad to have everybody here. Before we go to us. Thank you.
Councilor Duff.
Thank you. Did you work with Tom Perez when he was on detail? Justice with Ken?
So Tom Perez worked at the Judiciary Committee before I got there, but I think Charlotte Burroughs and I have run in with him on various occasions.
Good run-ins?
Good run-ins, yes.
Very good friend.
Yes, he's
One of my closest friends.
extraordinary.
An extraordinary man.
Yes.
Extraordinary family. She's an extraordinary person. I always tell people, Tom and Anne Marie are two of the, I went to school in DC, so everyone's a lawyer. Everyone knows a lawyer. But they are two of the only people I know who went to law school who are both doing exactly what they said they would do when they became lawyers, public service. And her work with the homeless is extraordinary. I don't really have a lot of questions either. Your reputation is stunning in a good way. And you know, the calls I've gotten from people who have great legal minds that I deeply respect, and particularly Patrick Moore, have resonated with me very much. And so, you know, I could waste time and ask you a bunch of questions, but I'm not going to. Your writing is tremendous. I appreciate it very much. I think your clerkship is also something that gives a nice depth to your legal background. My one question is though, on the appeals court, how do you think you're going to feel about being on a panel? How does it suit you?
I think I'm excited about the prospect of being on 3 judge panels because in part, it's an opportunity to really look at legal issues in taking perspectives that I may not necessarily think of when I look at an issue, and to get the other judges' experiences and to really discuss and debate concepts. I think that's something I really look forward to. I know there's this great tradition of collegiality on the court, but sort of the ability to sort of take in other perspectives is something I'm really looking forward to.
Thank you, because that's exactly what I, you know, I'm not a lawyer, and Judge Green and I have had a lot of good conversations. But nothing to me is more intellectually exciting than somebody who can change my mind. That's exciting to me. That's something I like. And that's what I think is so interesting about the appeals court. And frankly, I was conversing with one of my colleagues today and said, it's the reason why I voted for some people on the court that maybe I wouldn't have voted for, because they really do look at things differently than me. And what's the world if everyone's all exactly the same, especially the law? I mean, we need that nuance in everything. So I'm pleased with that answer. I think it's a great answer. I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before I call on Council Kennedy, I neglected to have you introduce. There's other people here that you want to introduce.
Let's see, who have I not introduced? We know Chief Justice Green and Justice Shin. You've met Sherry Costa, Jesse Boodoo, my daughters, my wife, my parents. This is Aaron Grabowski, our very close family friend, who is very kind to come in today. And over there, Liza Tran is our fearless and just exemplary leader of the trial division in the Government Bureau. Ann Sturman is my deputy bureau chief, who I've worked with exceptionally closely over the years. Bessie Dewar is our amazing state solicitor, who I've also worked with closely since I came into the office in 2015. And Paige Scott Reed and time have been so helpful to me throughout this entire process, and I really appreciate their.
Thank you for introducing us. Council Kennedy.
I'm a little troubled by something Deputy Legal Counsel said.
Uh-oh.
And I asked him how Paige Scott Reed was treating him. He said she was the best boss she ever had. What boss? What's that about?
Well, I'm saying, I understand. Anyone else pick up on that? Understand why I answered that one.
The second question is, have you ever met Chief Justice Green before?
Sorry.
Chief Justice Green.
Oh, I've talked to him several times. This is the first time in person. I've talked to him several times on the
You
phone.
still want to be in the appeals court?
So, every indication has been positive.
Sometimes I have to make fun of him. He's my friend. He's a great guy, and he's going to be a great boss. We had a long talk on the phone, getting serious, a very, very long talk. And I was incredibly impressed with you. I was very impressed with the fact that you were in Senator Kennedy's office, somebody I had a great deal of respect for and had many opportunities to meet throughout my life. I think you're going to be an outstanding member of the appeals court. You certainly have the background, you certainly have the passion. Okay? Your parents, your wife, especially your children should be very, very proud of you today. The odds of a lawyer in Massachusetts becoming a member of the appeals court, the number of lawyers here is something like 0.005%. So this is a really huge deal. You should be very, very proud of him today. It's an amazing feat. I'll be voting for you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor DePaul.
Thank you, Councilor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I can tell from where I'm sitting that your family is super proud of you today. Council Kennedy asked all the difficult questions. You have some very persistent supporters, and I know over the holiday, she's not to connect directly. So we may connect after your hearing on a couple of things, but overall, the people who've reached out to me, tremendous things to say about it. I'm not going to belabor the hearing by by rehashing things that I've learned about you. But you're a very impressive nominee, and I look forward to supporting you next week. Thank you.
Council Jacobs.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello
Good
again.
again. I appreciate that you came out to North Adams and we sat down and had a really rich and a conversation that ranged over all sorts of topics. I will echo that your background is amazing and fascinating and demonstrates a commitment to so many of the values and issues in the world of justice that I hold dear, and I'm impressed to see someone have really given so much time and energy. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk more about, we talked about, I believe you wrote it well at Yale, but the article about the absence of agency in indigent defense. And wanted to hear from you your perspective from when you wrote that to today, if you've seen any improvement. And first just start like just explain the basic premise of what that's about, but then have you seen it evolve in a way that's positive and have progress, or are we still basically in the same space that you had seen?
Well, thank you, Counselor. So just a little background on the article that I wrote, and I think it was published in the American Criminal Law Review. And as I mentioned, I've been working on indigent defense reform issues from the start of my career. And I've always been interested in why certain systems succeed and certain fail. And there certainly are many strong indigent defense systems throughout the country, including here in Massachusetts. But I've also seen systems that really fail, systems where the lawyers are just overburdened with impossibly manageable caseload, and where there's just very little concern for the interests of the defendants, and they just get mass processed through the system. So what I tried to do in this article is look at the issue from the perspective of the principal agency relationship between the client, the indigent defendant, and the appointed lawyer. And I examined how the courts over the years have really created different rules for how the client can control the representation that's really distinct from how we would control a lawyer that we retain privately to write a will or something like that. And so from that, I extrapolated sort of the idea that this is a fundamental difference, and it really is one of the reasons that there can be so much inadequate funding of indigent defense systems in different jurisdictions. It's essentially appointed counsel don't have to pursue investigations. They don't have to pursue defenses that the client wants them to. The loss of autonomy by the client just undermines the whole overall effectiveness of the system. As to how things have developed, I think that, I think we're coming on the 60th anniversary of Gideon, and every 10 years, there's all these reports and people studying this issue. I think a lot of jurisdictions have made progress, but in a lot of places, it really comes down to, is the legislature going to provide enough funding for the indigent defense systems? Are they going to allow these systems to be organized in a really effective public defender offices? And I think that's constantly, it's a constant challenge for how our justice system works. And the only thing that really makes a difference is the legislature and the people recognizing how important it is to the effective functioning of our justice system. And I think that really varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So it's hard to generalize as we've made considerable progress, but there certainly is a lot of awareness of the challenge that we face.
So let me ask you two follow-up questions related to that. And thank you very much for that. Because that was kind of a broad-based nationwide consideration with that original article, right? It wasn't Massachusetts specific. So when you look at Massachusetts, I'm just curious to see how you would hold up the Massachusetts state of affairs in this particular issue. And then my second question is, to me, as I think about this issue and what you're sharing and what you've talked about when we talk together now, the impact on these particular issues on the racial disparities we see in our justice system and how that plays out, because it seems to me that probably, at least that's an assumption I'm making, so you can share your thoughts on it, which I'm sure are gonna be far more well-versed than my own. But that's the like the symptom, one symptom I think that leads to where we're at as far as
Right. I mean,
agency.
working in the government bureau, we've had the somewhat unique experience that on some certain occasions, we represent CPCS as a client, and many other occasions, CPCS is the opposing party, and they've brought really interesting reform litigation throughout the years, cases that have gone up to the SJC. My impression is that the CPCS is full of really motivated, smart attorneys who work very hard under very challenging circumstances. And I think it's in part because the judiciary and the legislature recognize indigent defense as a priority. And so that carries through into how these issues get carried out. Certainly, the issue of racial disparities is a key issue when it comes to these problems. And, when I was working in the South, one of the things that my office really focused on was how disparities in application of the death penalty in Southern states could often be traced back to the way indigent defense systems were funded. In Alabama, when I started practice, I think a lawyer would receive $1,000 for his or her work on a capital trial. That was the full capped rate. And you can't hire someone to write you a goodwill for $1,000, and so the idea that you're going to get effective representation in this extremely challenging environment when the financial resources are so limited, and how that plays out, you don't get the adequate adjudication of issues. You don't distinguish between the guilty and the innocent, or those who deserve the most severe penalty from those who don't. The process just doesn't work. And I think as a consequence, you see all sorts of disparities, including race disparities.
Thank you for that. I don't really have much more to ask you. Did you bring your manual, by the way, as a show and tell?
I didn't bring it today.
I did. My fellow counselors. The benefit of meeting in person is you get the show and tell aspect.
All right.
But clearly you're not afraid to dive in and really tackle big issues and write at length about them. So, but I did appreciate that you brought that and shared that with me when you came. No, I'll close there. You clearly, both in your application and your resume and in our discussions have just a stellar history and experience and perspective. I really appreciated the discussions we had around bias and our court system and have no doubt that you will be a wonderful addition to the appeals bench. So
thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thank you, Counselor. Well, thank you for all the time you afforded me at the diner.
Pleasure.
Got to know you and your, that's why you're probably 1,010 that I've met now of the parole board to the judge, because I want to know the whole person, and so, and he's on the Hall of Fame for the Belgian waffle. I want you to know, Judge, because it's very important to me. But I have to say, I have never seen a range of legal practice of anyone. This is incredible. And I mean, to start out, when you talk about representing, in Congress, and you represented Feinstein and Kennedy and all of that, it's just amazing. And what you covered, I think people should know, just in that frame, never mind the rest of your legal experience, but it was involved in constitutional amendments, federal criminal policy sentencing, prison conditions, juvenile justice, drug control treatment, hate crimes, LGBTQ rights, terrorism, surveillance, and interrogation of issues, oversight of the Department of Justice, and it goes on, drugs and all of that. But there's some things that really a lot, probably in this room, we're concerned about that you have taken up. One of them is charter schools. There was, a challenge. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, when one of the first cases I took on when I came to the office in 2015 was a challenge brought by three of the leading law firms in Boston, challenging the cap on charter schools. And if you may recall, at that time, there was also a ballot initiative that my office had certified to be on the ballot, and it was going to be presented to the voters in 2016. But this was an attempt to kind of circumvent that process and have a court strike down the charter school on constitutional grounds. Juliana Rice, Julia Kobik, and I represented the Secretary of Education and the commissioners in that case. We moved to dismiss. Judge Brieger granted our motion to dismiss, and then that case went up to the SJC, and we won that unanimously in the SJC, saying that this is fundamentally a quintessential decision for the legislature to decide, and not for the courts to strike down. So that was a very challenging case, but we were very proud of the result it in.
Well, I served on the Commission on Disabilities for 22 years, so that's very close to my heart. And I thank you for all that you have done for people, because I look for that. It's very important for a judge to know when that person who has a disability, whether it's autism, whatever, be knowledgeable, have an understanding of it. And I don't think a lot of judges do. They don't understand. But, and you've been involved in hate crimes. And do you want to tell us about any of those?
Sure. Senator Kennedy was the lead sponsor of the federal hate crimes bill. It was called the Matthew Shepard Local Law Enforcement Act. That was to strengthen the existing federal law on hate crimes and include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected categories. So that was something that I took on when I came into his office, his Judiciary Committee staff, and we had several great votes in the Senate on it. It ultimately passed after I left and came up to Massachusetts a few years later, but we definitely felt that we set a great foundation for that bill while we were there.
Things that we don't hear about, you involved in the Prison Rape Elimination Act. We don't hear that. We don't see that in the news. So tell us how effective you were.
I'm very proud of that legislation. This was a bill that we developed very quickly in 2003. There was a really broad coalition of advocates that a lot of evangelical churches on the right, the NAACP and groups on the left that came together to focus on the issue of sexual violence in prisons and to sort of establish standards that are apply to all prisoners in jails today in the United States. The co-sponsor of that bill was Jeff Sessions from Alabama. Senator Kennedy, of course, was fantastic at working across the aisle, but I don't think he had worked with Senator Sessions on legislation yet. And when we got it passed, we actually got it passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate, which was very difficult to do. And I believe it was the first sort of constructive prison conditions litigation that Congress had passed in decades. So I was exceptionally proud of that.
That's impressive. And you've been involved in that we have seen, and it has been noted in the news, Judge Joseph in Newton.
Yes.
That case.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So, right. So, as you know, Judge Joseph was charged, and Wesley McGregor, a court officer, were charged with obstruction of justice under federal law for the incident that occurred, I think, back in 2018. We filed a brief on behalf of the Commonwealth, essentially arguing that we did not think this case was appropriately brought in federal court, that whatever issue had occurred at the courthouse was appropriate for the judicial, the Commission on Judicial Conduct, but it wasn't a federal offense. There had never been an instance where the federal government had tried to prosecute a Massachusetts judge for conduct taken within the scope of her authority. And also the particular federal obstruction statutes that were being applied had never actually been applied to ICE enforcement activities. So on those bases, we thought that the case should be dismissed. We filed briefs in the district court and then on the First Circuit on appeal. And ultimately, the U.S. Attorney's Office decided to drop the charges.
How did that take up the part where she allowed he had been a drug dealer, he had been he'd been deported twice, and he was a criminal, and she allowed him out the back door. Was that part of
Well,
it?
that was alleged. I don't think ultimately the way it was resolved was that I think that the judge stipulated to having turned off the recording machine, and that issue was referred to the Commission on Judicial Conduct. I don't know what actions were taken from that. I think
You had some really high profile, I mean, even, the drug scandals that are so, I mean, how much? Millions of dollars involved, people that are innocent were found guilty, and people that were guilty released. I mean, I don't even know how they resolved that with Ian Dugan. Tell us about that one.
yes, so that those cases, uh, several very important SJC decisions, essentially establishing broad-based relief for defendants who may have been affected by the misconduct in the two drug labs. And what my office has been doing essentially is dealing with the fallout of those decisions. There have been various civil actions brought, but one of the things that we work really hard, and my colleague Ann Sturman has been critical to this, is providing refunds to defendants for different criminal justice exactions that they paid in connection with these convictions that were later overturned. That has been a very laborious, difficult process to sort of figure out who is due what and to administer that settlement. But I'm very proud of the work that we've done. And I think we've sent out $13 million or so back to these defendants. And so we've been kind of cleaning up the situation for several years, but I'm really proud of how we've handled it.
I'm going to ask you something that's kind of off the track, okay? And I don't know if Judge Green will remember this, but I kind of look into some of these cases I'm interested in, and one of them was a dog case. And I'll tell you what happened. It came before the appeals court, and this woman was challenging the judgment of a judge. She was out with her little dog in the front of her house, and this man came by with two dogs, one on a leash and a German Shepherd that was not leashed. The German Shepherd saw the little dog, ran on the lawn, and really tore him apart. Now, the good news is he had surgery, and they saved his life, and it cost $4,000 to the owner. So when she went to court to retrieve that $4,000, the judge ruled the dog is property. So if you were on the appeals court, how would you rule?
I think if I answered this incorrectly, I might be disowned by my parents, dog lovers. My view, and I believe it's consistent with precedent, is that the owner of the attacking dog is liable for all reasonably incurred veterinary expenses that result from the attack, even if those costs exceed the so-called market value of the victim dog as a matter of property. So I think the surgical expenses would be covered.
Well, thank you, and I agree with you. And as an animal lover, and we all have animals in my family, we don't consider them property at all. So I thank you for that. I've been very impressed, your writings. You have books, and you gave me one of the books, and I'm up till 3 a.m. reading it. And tell me, what was the most important book or publication that you have written out of those 8?
Thank you, Counselor. I do think it's the book I gave you a copy of. It's a manual for prisoners that explains to them their rights to medical treatment and in safe and healthy conditions of confinement. Explains how those rights have been articulated by the Supreme Court and by other courts, and also explains to them how they can go into court and try to enforce those rights if they feel like their health or safety is.
Well, you couldn't have given me a more meaningful book, because I go out to the prisons and I have found they're not equal. You can go to Norfolk and meet with an inmate. The inmate will come out with a nice sweater, nice pants and shoes. You go to Bridgewater and they come out in an orange uniform. You have to have all these regulations. But I've done a lot of research, and I found out that Bridgewater, there's a lot of them sick, some dying. They're not getting real medical help that they need. So I've met with Governor Healy about that, because I thought there was one person over all the prisons. No, I see, I'm ignorant of that. So everyone is, it goes by different rules and policies. So I'm really, happy that she met with me and we talked about that. And that book was right on target with what you're saying. Prisoners need the same rights as anyone else for health, But so is there anything that you think, my gosh, you've covered everything. I know why don't you tell, I'm not going to say it because you've written it. What do you think the challenge is on the board that you're going to, the court you're going to? What is the challenge?
I think the challenge is um, to make sure that everyone who comes to the court, parties, attorneys, and members of the public, are treated respectfully, that the issues that they present to the court are considered in full and fairly and by neutral judges, and that the court also issue decisions promptly. I think it's almost as important that judges issue decisions promptly as it is they issue the right decision, because if you don't know where your case stands after a year or so, then you're just really not getting the full service that you deserve. So good.
About what you said was that, that there's a perception. Do you remember what you said? There's a perception about people coming to the court. Do you want to finish that, what you said?
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure exactly what I said.
No, but you talked about there's a perception that, I'm paraphrasing it, but that, they're not going to get the justice they're seeking and not going to be heard fairly.
Right. I mean, I think it's the way I look at the court system. It's a service profession. We are here to provide a service to the public and to help them resolve disputes in a way that's fair and neutral and peaceable. And so that's the service we bring. And we're here to, we're not the star of the show. We're here to assist people in resolving difficult disputes and giving them clarity as to how they adjust their conduct going forward. So that's my view as to the role of the courts. And I think it's also important that judges not consider themselves to be more important than they are. I remember Chief Justice Roberts saying at some point, nobody goes to a baseball game to watch the umpire. And I think that's really true, that we're there to help resolve cases and make the justice system work effectively and efficiently, but not to be more full of ourselves than we deserve to be.
Well, I'm also impressed with your pro bono.
Well, thank you.
You can always see that, and you have done a lot. And is there anything that was most rewarding in one of those cases that you represented someone pro bono?
I really enjoyed working on a number of the Supreme Court amicus briefs that we did in one of the affirmative action cases involving admissions policy at the University of Texas. We represented the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, which is leading Asian American advocacy group, and we argued that holistic consideration of race in the admissions process can benefit everyone, including Asian Americans. And I think that was it was a very eye-opening experience when I was researching and writing that brief. But I thought it was a very persuasive product in the end, and I was proud of the role that we played. And I think that brief was cited by the Supreme Court in that decision.
Now I'm going to ask you a question that I am very strong on. My answer would be, is there racial discrimination in the courts in Massachusetts?
I think there's probably racial discrimination in all our institutions, and I take to heart the message of the 7 justices in 2020 that it's incumbent on all of us to consider our conscious and unconscious bias and how we treat different groups within the system, and to really think hard about the work that we do and to do what we can to mediate those biases. So I don't think any institution is free of racial discrimination. I think we have a long legacy of racial prejudice in this country that has lingering effects even in institutions that are run by people of goodwill today. So I think that's an ongoing project for all of us.
The problem here is for the council, we don't have a crystal ball. And so that nominee can say, I don't have any racial discrimination against anyone, but do they? I don't know. But I know I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand when I meet an inmate who got life in prison without parole. And he wasn't even in the room when his friend stabbed to death, 12 times he stabbed to death someone. He didn't even know it. When they left that house, he didn't even know that his friend had murdered. And he got life in prison without parole. If he was white, I don't think so. I don't think that would have happened. And to me, after I met with him, I went in the car and I cried. But he did get a commutation, thank you. But how many more are in there that don't have an advocate? And so that's what I'm concerned about. And it is the judges that are making those. I met with William, who got the life in prison without parole, and he got the commutation. And I promised him when I met with him that I was going to bring him to an Italian restaurant in Watertown. And we did, we went. And it was remarkable because I said to him, you've only been out a few months now. What is the best thing that happened to you? And I almost cried. You know what he said? Marilyn, I've got my driver's license. But they took 33 years away from this man that was 20. There's no justice in that. How many more? So I don't know. But anyway, I have been really questioning you on everything, but you've covered everything. The writings and if you want to talk about the writings that you included, is there anything that you want to add on that?
I think we've covered, I'm very proud of the prisoner rights manual in particular, but.
It is, really. But, and thank you for the book. I couldn't believe it. You said, I have a book in my car. And I said, so that was great. But I want to thank you for applying. I know Justice Green is going to be over the moon when you come in. I know he's going to be looking forward to it because you don't have to learn on the job. You've seen it all, you've done it all. And thank you for agreeing that a dog is not property. So, tell you, I got a beautiful letter from the Attorney General, and I'm going to save it to next week when I put your name in nomination. I'm going to read it in its entirety. It's a wonderful letter. So for all of us, thank you for applying. I thank the governor and all the staff, anyone who was involved, and I can't wait to hear all the good things that's going to happen with you on the appeals court. So I thank you all for coming, and I'm going to adjourn.
Thank you.